The next speaker is Martin Royds from Jillamatong Beef in Braidwood. He's also a farmer for climate change and NSF, and he's addressing climate change as an holistic farmer. Please welcome Martin.
Oops. Thanks, Ashley. I'll grab this out. I play the didgeridoo. I've been doing it for about 20 odd years, and boy, I wish I could play it like that. That's not easy to do, some of the things he was doing. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional elders of this area and what they've done for the land. I've started to learn a lot more from Aboriginal people. I think Bill Gummage's book has made a huge difference in the way that we look at the land and the way we can learn from our past custodians. I'd like to also acknowledge the present custodians and elders, John Fry and David Goldney, for inviting me along here and being a mentors along the way. Charlie for doing his great insights and giving us the opportunity to learn from lots of other people. And Peter Andrews sitting down there wondering what on earth I'm going to say. So yeah, I've learned from all of those people and I thank them for that. And I think, to reiterate what's already been said today, that the land's in our hands now and it's up to us to keep learning from the previous managers and to start learning from ourselves and using that to improve the planet. Last week I was over in Western Australia and managed to go into the Wesfarmers art exhibition. And as there was only 4 of us wandering around there, and I stopped and looked very deeply at a painting. And I was looking at it there and thinking, nobody has actually ringbarked the trees here. There's clear land here, and it was clearly managed before white man came along. It was actually part of the photograph that Charlie put up there earlier. And when you look closely at that, you can see that that land was extremely well managed before we came along. In my experience of growing up in the Braidwood area, where I'm a 5th generation farmer, my ancestors came into that area and they were able to farm extremely well. They brought in sheep, more cattle and horses, and didn't have to clear the land. They did very well, and the land improved. The land didn't improve. The stock did very well, and the land went backwards. And that's something I think we've all got to put our hands up and accept. The theme I'm hoping to cover today is the fact, to reiterate what Charlie's said earlier, is that we've been very good at mining the soil, and perhaps we could start looking at whether we can mine the air. A lot of the talk is always about how much CO2's gone up in the atmosphere, and that's what we need to build soil carbon, so why can't we bring it back down? Nitrogen's one of the best nutrients to help make plants grow, and that's in abundance in the air, I think 74%. So there's plenty up in the air, and all we need to do is get it back down into the soil. Now, just introduce you to Jillamatong. This is my farm. That's the mountain in the background there, Mount Jillamatong. There's the erosion gully going through there. I was often when you hear "Welcome to Country," the Aboriginal people, when they do that, it's to welcome you to the country, to point out the dangerous areas where the food is, the way you've managed it and things like that. A bit like when Ashley did his Welcome to Country, told us where the toilets were and those sort of things. That was a process that you went through. So I'll run you through what I've learned at Jillamatong from a lot of the people that I've had the experience of meeting along the way. There was a big erosion gully down the bottom running through there, and I'll duck into my story. That's it. 1982 drought. Just like everybody else, when you go through these big droughts, you suddenly realise that you're doing things wrong. We denuded the land there. Look at the condition of those cattle. They're in shocking condition, and we fed out hay. I eventually went droving with the cattle, and we managed to get through, but at the end of it, we'd denuded all our pastures, and a big rain event came, and most of it then all washed down into the dams. We had nick points, erosion gullies all over the farm, and I went to university and, a bit like Charlie, learnt all the wrong things initially, and we were told that the land was old, degraded and worn out, and that these erosion gullies are just to be expected in the Australian old and worn out landscape. We had some good erosion gullies across our country. We had some cracking good erosion gullies. This one's on Jingle Money, where I grew up. It's 20 metres deep. All that land washed away in my lifetime. When I was a kid, it was back out here. Later on, when I started to learn about Peter Andrews and all that, and I talked to my father, he said that he put the drain in that started part of this erosion gully. The idea was that fluke was a big problem, and so you drained the land to get the water off the land and reduce the fluke problem. So looking at all those and going off to university, I thought, well, we need to stop ploughing, and I got into spraying and set up a contracting business doing spraying, and thought this was wonderful. I believed the way of what the reps told me, that we could drink this stuff and that it was going to save the soil structure and all that. And so I raced around spraying country and sowing and developing all different techniques of using less spray and different sowing implements. But I soon learned that that's not such a good idea. I got badly poisoned myself. And then I stopped and looked around and thought, well, I'm not only poisoning myself. In my spray grazing technique, I used to spray very light amount of chemical on and then put big mobs of sheep in there and graze that off. So put all the chemical in into the sheep and sold them to you as fat lambs. Nice guy. So Jillamatong had these old, degraded landscapes all over the place. I grew up, I didn't think that that we'd created all those. That's in another dry time, pulling a cow that had gone in to try and get some feed out of the bottom of the erosion gully. The erosion gully went the whole length of the farm. Initially it was quite steep banks, and I started to knock those banks down with, that's a head wall cut. In there was 4 head wall cuts going up the gully. It was up to 4 metres deep, draining all the water off the landscape. And I'll tell you later about how it was actually not only draining the water down across the landscape, but draining the water out of the soil. And that's a big quantum leap that starts to happen once you understand the process when you start stopping that. That's Peter Hazel, famous on the Australian Story 2 Mondays ago. Testing my salinity levels. When you've incised your land down into the water table, the salt starts moving sideways, and we're having 5,000 parts per million of salt coming out, which is too high for stock to drink, and it starts killing all the soil around it, so you end up with even better erosion. That's the same spot there actually where that cow was bogged, and I started off by putting small banks in the erosion gully and trying to fix it up that way, and then using large mobs of cattle to knock that down. Then I thought I'd better start doing a little bit of training and learning about how to fix this whole process, because I could see that things were getting worse rather than better. This is a holistic management training, not holistic management, biodynamics, that's it. How did you know? This lovely man here, and Hamish Mackay up the back, yes, taught me about biodynamics, which was about putting biology back into the system and understanding that. It's interesting when you look at Rudolf Steiner. He was contacted in the 1930s 30s by farmers in Germany saying that the land is not as productive as it used to be, and can you teach us how to put life back into the soil? Now, if you look back at these graphs that Charlie was mentioning about earlier, about when soil fertility really started dropping, it's actually after the 1930s. But these farmers in Germany could see that things were going backwards even back then. Then I met this lovely gentleman here who taught me that to love my weeds and compost. There he was hugging a weed, and he's standing there on about a metre of mulch. That was in the Jerry Harvey's place in the Widden Valley, and that had been caught by the trees that he'd planted there a few years before, and a flash flood caught that mulch and built up the fertility in that valley. I dropped in there 2 weeks ago, and it's just amazing. It's still, the water's still trickling through Jerry Harvey's place, and when you get to the bottom, it's a dry sand bed, as it was when I was up there. This was 2007. Peter told me that get as many plants growing, and I picked some of that Phragmites, and I've got that now growing in my system back at Jillamatong. It was mentioned earlier about land care. I think land care should always be acknowledged. I wouldn't have done holistic management. I wouldn't have probably met Peter Andrews if it wasn't through getting support through land care. Initially, I got funded to do the training programs, and then a lot of these programs of designing and mapping your farm out and thinking about how you want to get it functioning better have come through land care programs. Just a little thing on that. When I was at university, I learned about landscape associations, plant landscape associations, and I initially fenced my place off across the landscape, thinking the boggy meadows, the mid slopes and the high slopes, and I'd put my stock at different places at different times of the year. I've now, through learning about observing animals, observing the landscape, I've swung those fences up the slope. So now I give the stock the chance to decide where they want to be on a daily basis. They come down and they can eat the green plants down the bottom. They can eat a bit of dry feed to balance their gut, and then they hopefully go and sit on the top of the hill underneath the shade of the trees, ruminate and defecate. And in the process, they're taking fertility up the hill. As Peter often will point out, the three processes that are happening is gravity and water and sunlight. Now, if we can use the water to, I've slowed the water down, got plants growing in it, and then go against gravity and use my cattle to take the fertility back up the top of the hill. That's what I'm heading towards. With all those erosion gullies, we got in and when Peter came out, he said that, let's start pushing some rocks in here and slow the water down in my erosion gullies. And I'll just go back there. And so we got in and built all these weirs, and now I'm heading towards good soil. I don't know why that one's in there. And we've got contour channels now, putting the water back out onto the landscape. So that's what Jillamatong looks like now. That was a 4 metre deep erosion gully that was taking water off the landscape. And it was also, if you think about it, the water that landed on the landscape seeped through the soil, picking up my fertility and taking it out. And now we've got the water hydrating and going sideways. And channels on the side here taking the water out. A little thought along those channels, if you put compost heaps in there, you start getting nutrients into the whole system and working for you. This one here, you can see up the top there's the double channel. So the water runs kindly off my compacted neighbour's soil, the Reds bit, and fills the dam, spreads out on the first channel, and then the second one I've got compost in there, and that then leaches down. This is right at the top of the farm, and gravity then takes it right down through the farm. This just a couple of shots to run through a process, a nick point, water running over, eroding, taking fertility off, get a big dozer in. Instead of putting a bank above like we used to do, putting the bank in the erosion gully, and a week later it fills up and you've reversed the process of degradation. Another shot of, this was in steeper country, it's not easy to see, but that's quite steep country, so you've got to make the walls very close together, and then it fills up and you've got the water going across. Now, can we get that final one? So the future, I see quite exciting, as Charlie's pointed out before. I think we've got the opportunity now. I've had the great advantage of meeting Elan Ingham, Christine Jones, Peter, Alan Savory and that, and taking all their knowledge and using it on my farm. And it's not coming up. And I think we've got the opportunity to reverse it if we start thinking, how can we build landscapes, produce healthy food, and the advantage would be if we could get paid. To me, I think the solution in the future is if farmers start getting paid for nutrient-dense food rather than volume. That was an interesting slide Charlie put up where the... yes, I've got to finish now. So just to have a look at this one, you can see the water's slowed down, it's getting spread out across the landscape and it's seeping down across it. This was a dry floodplain and the water's now coming out of that. And if you look closely for those people down there, you can see in the bottom of the erosion gully, there's lots of water plants growing in there, and the dams are all still muddy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I was just thinking a little story. I've actually been on Martin's place planting trees, amongst other things. And I remember one time I was pretty keen to get back to Bathurst, and you'd had a cup of tea or something. And you said, "Oh, hang on, I've just got to go and shift my cattle." And I'm thinking, "Oh God, I'll be here all day. I'm not going to get back till 9 o'clock at night." And we jumped on your ute. And we went up the hill, and you opened a rusty old bit of wire, or like it wasn't an amazing gate. And the cattle, to start with, as you approached, the cattle came running. You know, Martin's kind of lazily, mid-conversation, opened a bit of a fence, kept talking to me. Cattle all running next door. He said, "Well, that's me done." I thought, wow, that's extraordinary. And I remember having a conversation with you about saying, oh, it must have taken a lot of effort. And you were saying, no, it's less effort than when you were set stocking. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I used to have 12 paddocks when I started, and if you wanted to get a mob of sheep or cattle in, you had to bring them in and try not to get them boxed with the rest. Now I've got 53 paddocks, and most of the stock are in one paddock. To mark the cattle, you bring in one mob. They're done in a day instead of having to bring in 12 mobs.
And the other thing I think is probably good for you to quickly mention is the nutrient story. You've had your beef tested more than most people would. Can you just briefly explain the quality?
So I sent it all off to the National Testing Authority, who said that they'd also tested Woolies meat. And to my surprise, I found that I had a perfect omega-3, omega-6 balance. Omega-3 gets into the food chain through algae. And that in these water channels we've got a lot of the beneficial algae in there, so that probably builds the omega-3. Mine was 2-to-1 ratio. The feedlotted beef in Australia is 8-to-1. In America, where they feed them corn, it's 20-to-1. That stuff will poison you. My stuff actually makes you better. I've got people come and buy my fat because it's actually good for you.
Right.
And all the other minerals too were high.
Okay, I know we're pushing up on morning tea, but out of holistic management, biodynamics, key line design, or natural sequence farming, which has had the greatest effect on your landscape?
All of them. I think, to be honest, and Peter's going to kick me for this, I'd say holistic management, because it's a process of making decisions. And in that process of setting my goal and deciding where I wanted to go, the best tool I could see to fix my land was then to use Peter Andrews' understanding of the landscape and getting that working.
Right, then there's quite a few detailed questions here about that weeds and where to place weirs and that. I think we'll hold that in the interest of getting to morning tea and allowing our next speaker a bit of time. But thanks again, Martin.
One final
hang
thing,
on.
sorry.
Not quite thanks.
Soils for Life.
Mhm.
Yeah, they've got a whole program in there we can read about. There's 140 pages on
True.
looking at my production per 100 mils of rainfall, etc., etc. And as has been said, we can produce more food doing less.
Okay, good
Thanks.
one. Thank you very much, Martin.